I am Nia, 29 years old. As everyone sang happy birthday to our 1-year-old son, I caught my husband kissing my best friend. When I finally confronted him, he pulled me into the bedroom, locked the door, stared at me coldly, and said, "Accept it or get out." I quietly picked up our son and left. Within minutes, I froze every joint account and pulled my $585 million stake out of his company. 15 minutes later, my phone showed 57 missed calls. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to burn an empire to the ground to protect your peace. The evening began like any other flawless event in our social circle. We were hosting our son Leo's first birthday party at our sprawling estate in Buckhead, the most exclusive neighborhood in Atlanta. To an outsider, my life looked like an absolute fairy tale. The backyard was transformed into an extravagant wonderland that looked more like a gala for the elite than a child's birthday celebration. There were valets parking luxury cars in our long circular driveway. A string quartet played classical renditions of popular R&B songs under a massive custom-built floral archway. Waiters in crisp white shirts circulated with silver trays of champagne and gourmet appetizers. It was a flawless display of wealth designed specifically to showcase my husband's status. Marcus was the CEO of Sterling Group, a high-end commercial real estate development firm, and he loved nothing more than playing the role of the self-made titan. I sat quietly in a velvet emerald green armchair near the patio doors, watching the spectacle unfold. I intentionally chose a simple, elegant silk dress, avoiding the flashy designer logos that my husband and his family loved to parade around. To everyone mingling on that manicured lawn, I was just Nia, the lucky stay-at-home mom, who had somehow managed to lock down Atlanta's most eligible bachelor. They smiled at me with thinly veiled pity, assuming I spent my days shopping and relying entirely on my husband's black credit card. They had no idea that at age 24, I had sold a medical technology patent for hundreds of millions of dollars. They had no idea that I secretly controlled Obsidian Trust, a venture capital firm, or that I preferred my quiet, unassuming life to protect my privacy. I let them believe whatever made them feel comfortable. The true challenge of the evening, however, was not the pretentious guests. It was my mother-in-law, Mama Brenda. From the moment she arrived, dripping in heavy gold jewelry and wearing a sequined dress that caught every light in the garden, she made it her mission to establish her dominance. Mama Brenda was the kind of woman who believed her son walked on water and that no woman on earth would ever be worthy of him. She thrived on social currency and appearances, constantly inflating Marcus's ego while finding subtle, sharp ways to diminish my presence in my own home. As the sun began to set, casting a warm, golden glow over the swimming pool, Mama Brenda glided over to where I was sitting. She was holding a crystal glass of champagne, her gaze sweeping over my simple dress with clear disapproval. She leaned down, her heavy floral perfume completely overpowering the scent of the garden. "You really should have worn the diamond necklace Marcus bought you for your anniversary, Nia," she said, her voice loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "It is not polite to look so plain when your husband works so tirelessly to provide this incredible lifestyle for you. People might think you do not appreciate all his hard work." I offered a polite, practiced smile, keeping my voice perfectly steady. "I wanted to keep things focused on Leo today, Mama Brenda. It is a child's birthday party, not a fashion show." She let out a sharp, condescending laugh that grated on my nerves. "Oh, honey, everything is a fashion show when you are married to a man like my Marcus. You are just so incredibly blessed he chose you. A man of his stature, a true self-made billionaire, he could have had anyone. Any high-powered lawyer or doctor. But he has a generous heart. He likes taking care of a woman who needs him." I took a slow sip of my sparkling water, refusing to let her see how much her words irritated me. The irony was suffocating. She was standing in a mansion owned by a real estate holding company that my secret trust controlled. She was praising a business that survived solely because I had anonymously bailed it out of bankruptcy 4 years prior. But I kept my expression blank, nodding gracefully. Mama Brenda did not stop there. She flagged down the nanny and practically snatched Leo out of her arms, parading my son around to her wealthy friends from the country club. She introduced him to everyone not as my child, but as the sole heir to the Sterling Group empire, the boy who inherited all of his father's brilliant genes. Whenever someone tried to compliment me on the party decorations or the beautiful catering, Mama Brenda would smoothly insert herself into the conversation, loudly proclaiming that Marcus had paid for the best event planners in the city so that I would not have to stress my pretty little head over the details. I watched the entire charade from my chair, maintaining my composed exterior while feeling completely suffocated by the toxicity of it all. My best friend Chloe stood a few feet away laughing at one of Marcus's jokes, holding a glass of champagne. I thought I had allies in that yard. I thought I was simply enduring a difficult mother-in-law for the sake of family harmony. The chorus of Happy Birthday began to echo across the lawn as the caterers brought out a massive multi-tiered cake. Everyone gathered around the patio, singing and clapping. I smiled and turned toward the house, intending to grab the special silver cake server I had bought specifically for this occasion. I had no idea that crossing that threshold would shatter the illusion of my marriage forever. The heavy glass doors slid shut behind me, instantly muting the loud chatter and the upbeat melodies drifting from the backyard. The sudden quiet of the house was a stark contrast to the performative circus outside. The central air conditioning cooled my skin as I walked across the polished marble floors of the foyer. I was heading toward the formal dining room to grab the vintage silver cake server, a treasured family heirloom I had brought specifically for Leo's first birthday. But as I passed the West Wing corridor, a strange instinct made me stop in my tracks. Marcus's private study was located at the very end of that hall. It was his ultimate sanctuary, an overly masculine room filled with dark mahogany, rich leather chairs, and framed magazine covers featuring his face. The heavy oak double doors were usually locked during parties because Marcus hated guests wandering near his precious workspace. Today, however, one of the doors was left slightly ajar. A thin slice of warm amber light spilled out onto the hallway runner. At first, I thought he might be taking a quick business call. Marcus was notorious for stepping away from family events to close a deal, always claiming that his hustle never slept. I turned down the corridor, intending to tap on the door and tell him it was time to cut his son's birthday cake. My heels made absolutely no sound on the thick, luxurious carpet. When I reached the door, I did not knock. I simply pushed the heavy wood open a few more inches and stepped inside. The breath completely left my lungs. My feet rooted themselves to the floorboards. There was no business call. There was no real estate emergency. Instead, I found my husband and my best friend. Marcus had Chloe pinned against the edge of his massive custom walnut desk, the very desk I had secretly paid for through a proxy when his company was struggling to maintain its elite image. They were locked in a desperate, passionate kiss. It was not a quick, drunken mistake. It was the deep, practiced embrace of two people who had done this many times before. Chloe had both of her hands tangled in Marcus's perfectly faded haircut. Her emerald green designer dress, the exact one we had shopped for together just last week, was bunched up around her thighs. The delicate strap had slipped entirely off her left shoulder, leaving her chest exposed and her hair a tangled mess. Marcus had his hands gripping her waist, pulling her flesh against him, completely consumed by the moment. I stood frozen just inside the doorway. I did not drop a glass. I did not gasp. I did not scream or fall to my knees in dramatic agony. I simply stared. The silence in the room was absolute, save for the disgusting wet sounds of their heavy breathing and the rustle of Chloe's silk dress against the polished wood of the desk. My mind went into a chilling overdrive. A hyper-focused state of clarity washed over me, sharpening every detail in the room. The scent of Marcus's expensive cologne was heavily mixed with Chloe's signature floral perfume, creating a toxic fragrance that made my stomach turn. I looked at Chloe. We had met during our freshman year at Spelman College. We had shared dorm rooms, split cheap meals, and cried over exams. Just 2 hours ago, she had been helping me adjust Leo's little bow tie, telling me how proud she was of the beautiful family I had built. She had smiled right in my face, drank my champagne, and then slipped away to desecrate my marriage. I realized then that her constant praise over the years was never genuine support. It was pure, unadulterated envy. She did not just want a life like mine, she wanted my exact life. Then I looked at Marcus, the man who demanded absolute perfection from me, the man who constantly reminded me of my duties as a high society wife, the man who stood on stages at conferences preaching about building generational wealth and black excellence while actively destroying his own foundation. He let his mother humiliate me on the lawn because he believed his financial dominance gave him the right to rule over everyone. Yet here he was risking his marriage, his family, and his public image for a cheap thrill against a desk. I felt a cold, dark energy settling deeply into my bones. Any normal woman might have started throwing the expensive crystal decanters lined up on his bar cart. Any other wife would have charged at them, demanding answers, begging for an explanation, or sobbing uncontrollably. But I was not just any wife. Crying and screaming were for people who felt powerless. Crying was for women who depended on their husbands for survival. I did not depend on Marcus for anything. He depended on me, and he did not even know it yet. I did not move a single muscle. I just stood there, letting the harsh reality of their betrayal burn away the last remaining shreds of love and loyalty I held for this man. The silence stretched out heavy and suffocating. It was a silence so profound and unnatural that it eventually became loud enough to break their concentration. Chloe shifted her weight, opening her eyes as she pulled back slightly to catch her breath. Her gaze drifted over Marcus's shoulder and landed directly on me. The blood instantly drained from her face. Her eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated terror. She froze, her hands hovering awkwardly in the air, a panicked, strangled sound dying in her throat before it could even escape. Marcus, sensing her sudden rigidity, turned his head slowly to follow her line of sight. His eyes met mine. For a fraction of a second, I saw a flash of surprise cross his features, but it vanished just as quickly as it appeared. There was no scramble to push Chloe away. There was no frantic apology or desperate attempt to cover up what they were doing. Instead, Marcus slowly released his grip on Chloe's waist. He took a deliberate step back, casually straightening his bespoke suit jacket and adjusting his cuffs, looking at me with an expression of complete, arrogant indifference. Marcus stepped forward. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not offer a frantic explanation or swear that this meant nothing. He did not show a single ounce of remorse. Instead, he closed the distance between us, his expensive leather shoes completely silent on the thick carpet. Chloe shrank back against the desk, clutching her dress, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. But Marcus stood tall. He reached out and wrapped his large, heavy hand tightly around my wrist. His grip was firm, a physical manifestation of the absolute control he believed he had over me and our entire life. He leaned in close, his jaw set and his voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper that was entirely meant to intimidate me. "Listen to me very carefully, Nia," he growled, his eyes cold and devoid of any love. "I am the one who brings the money into this family. I am the king of this house. I built this empire with my own 2 hands. You are just a stay-at-home mother who gets to enjoy the fruits of my labor. Men like me, men with my power and my wealth, we do not live by regular rules. So you are going to accept this. You are going to smile, keep your mouth shut, and hold on to your life of luxury. Or you can pack your bags, pick up our son, and walk out of the house that I bought with my hard work. Right now, the choice is yours." He stared down at me, fully expecting me to crumble under the weight of his ultimatum. He expected me to cry, to beg him to stop, to frantically negotiate for my place in his grand, wealthy life. He expected the weak, dependent woman his mother had been loudly belittling all afternoon in our backyard. But I felt absolutely nothing. The anger that should have consumed me had instantly crystallized into pure, freezing ice. I looked down at his fingers wrapped around my wrist, noting the heavy gold watch on his arm, and then I slowly brought my eyes back up to meet his. I did not blink. I did not flinch. With one swift, sharp motion, I yanked my arm completely out of his grasp. I shifted my gaze to Chloe. She was shivering against the desk, waiting for me to scream at her, waiting for the stereotypical fight over a man who had just proven he was not worth the breath in my lungs. I gave her nothing. No tears, no insults, no satisfaction of knowing she had broken me. She was utterly irrelevant to my future. I simply turned my back on them both and walked toward the exit. I did not slam the study door. I left it wide open, letting the cheerful, upbeat music from the backyard drift into the room to mock their betrayal. I walked back through the house with perfect posture. My heart rate was incredibly steady. I stepped out onto the patio where the golden hour sun was still shining brightly over the extravagant party. The string quartet was transitioning into an upbeat tempo. Guests were laughing, holding their champagne flutes, completely oblivious to the empire that was about to collapse around them. I spotted the nanny near the massive floral archway holding Leo. I walked straight over, my face an impenetrable mask of calm, and took my son into my arms. He giggled, grabbing a tiny fistful of my silk dress. Mama Brenda was holding court near the oversized gift table, loudly boasting to a group of real estate executives about the brand new Porsche Cayenne Marcus had gifted me for my birthday last month. She was proudly explaining how generous her son was to a wife who contributed absolutely nothing financially to their household. I walked right up to the table. Without breaking my stride, I reached into my clutch, pulled out the heavy custom key fob for the Porsche, and dropped it onto a silver platter right next to the towering birthday cake. The metal hit the silver with a sharp, heavy clatter that made Mama Brenda stop speaking mid-sentence. She looked down at the keys, then looked up at me in sheer confusion. I did not offer a single word of explanation. I did not even look at her. I turned and walked down the long, sweeping driveway, completely bypassing the row of luxury vehicles and the scrambling valets. I headed straight for the street where I had parked my old, reliable sedan. It was the modest car I had owned since I was 24, long before I ever met Marcus. He absolutely hated that car. He constantly begged me to get rid of it because he claimed it ruined the aesthetic of his millionaire driveway. Now, it was my getaway vehicle. I carefully strapped Leo into his car seat in the back. He babbled happily, completely unaware of the massive shift in our universe. I slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and pulled away from the Buckhead estate. I drove down the tree-lined streets with perfect precision. I did not look in the rearview mirror. There were no tears blurring my vision. My hands did not shake on the steering wheel. There was only a dead, terrifying calm settling over my entire body. The game of being the quiet, submissive wife was officially over. Marcus wanted me to walk away from his money, completely unaware that his entire reality was funded by mine. It was time to execute the financial death sentence he had just unknowingly signed. I drove for exactly 12 minutes before pulling into the brightly lit parking lot of a high-end grocery store. It was a perfectly mundane location, an ordinary backdrop for the total annihilation of my husband's financial reality. I parked the sedan in the furthest corner, completely shielded by the shadows of a massive oak tree. In the back seat, Leo had already fallen asleep. His soft, rhythmic breathing was the only sound inside the quiet car. I turned off the engine, but left the battery running to keep the air conditioning flowing over him. He was safe, he was peaceful, and he was the only part of my marriage worth protecting. I reached under the passenger seat and pulled out my heavy leather tote bag. Inside was not makeup or diapers, but a sleek, matte black laptop. It was heavily encrypted, a device that Marcus genuinely believed I used for online shopping and organizing family recipes. He had always joked to his wealthy friends about how cute it was that his stay-at-home wife needed a high-performance machine just to browse the internet. He had absolutely no idea that this machine was the secure portal to a financial empire that eclipsed his wildest dreams. I flipped open the laptop. The screen glowed, casting a pale bluish light over my face in the dim car. I bypassed the standard login screen, entering a complex string of commands that brought up a secondary hidden operating system. A biometric scanner requested my fingerprint. I pressed my thumb against the glass. Access granted. The highly classified interface of my private wealth management system loaded immediately. Before I initiated the corporate takedown of his entire company, I needed to handle the personal insults. I accessed the private banking portal that managed our marital assets. Marcus loved bragging about his wealth, but the truth was, he was incredibly reckless with his cash flow. He spent money faster than he could build his commercial properties. I pulled up the dashboard displaying our 4 primary joint accounts. There was the high-yield savings account he used as a prop to show his mother how perfectly he provided for his family. There was the luxury travel fund we used to book private jets and 5-star villas in the Maldives. There was the primary checking account that funded the Buckhead Estate's massive monthly overhead. And finally, there was the crown jewel of his fragile ego, the American Express Centurion account, the legendary black card. I clicked on the black card profile to initiate the freeze, but a secondary line of data immediately caught my eye. I frowned, leaning closer to the screen. Under the primary account holder name, Marcus Sterling, there was a supplementary authorized user listed. The card had been issued 8 months ago and was mailed to a luxury high-rise apartment downtown. The name on the authorized user profile was Chloe Davis, my best friend. A cold, humorless smile spread across my face. Marcus had not just been sleeping with Chloe. He had been funding her entire lifestyle using the very credit line I had secretly secured for him when his personal credit score tanked 4 years ago. I quickly reviewed the recent transaction history on her specific supplementary card. $5,000 at a designer boutique, $2,000 at a luxury spa, $800 at a high-end lingerie store just 3 days ago. He was financing his dirty, secretive affair with my money. The absolute audacity was almost poetic. They thought they were playing me for a fool, completely unaware that I monitored the very grid they were standing on. I did not feel a single ounce of sorrow. I felt like a surgeon holding a scalpel ready to completely excise a toxic tumor. I navigated to the deep administrative controls of the banking portal. I did not just pause the cards or report them temporarily lost. That would be a rookie mistake. That would allow Marcus to call the bank's concierge desk and charm his way into a temporary override. Instead, I activated a total asset freeze citing a suspected massive fraudulent breach and money laundering. By initiating the lock under the guise of an active federal financial investigation, a protocol which my status as a high-level private wealth client allowed me to trigger automatically, the bank's security systems would instantly lock down every single cent. It required a physical in-person investigation to undo. No phone calls could fix it. No withdrawals, no wire transfers, no credit authorizations. I clicked the first button. The primary checking account went dark. The balance of $300,000 was instantly inaccessible. I clicked the second button. The luxury travel fund was locked. I clicked the third button, sealing off the high-yield savings account. Finally, I opened the master control panel for the black card. I took a deep breath, picturing Marcus standing in his study, buttoning his bespoke suit jacket, thinking he had won. I imagined him genuinely believing he had put me in my place. I imagined Chloe holding her crystal glass of champagne, secure in her stolen wealthy reality, thinking she had finally conquered the life she had always been jealous of. I hit execute. The system confirmed the total irrevocable restriction of the black card and all authorized user accounts. In an instant, the heavy metal card in Marcus's leather wallet and the shiny new plastic card in Chloe's designer purse were rendered completely worthless. They were nothing more than useless deadweight. They could not buy a cup of coffee. They could not pay the valet drivers waiting in my driveway. They could not put a single drop of gas into the luxury cars they drove. I sat back against the leather seat of my sedan, watching the confirmation screens glow a vibrant, satisfying red. The personal accounts were officially dead. Marcus Sterling, the self-proclaimed king of Atlanta real estate, currently had $0 to his name. But that was only the appetizer. It was time to pull the trigger on his entire company. I reached for my phone and dialed a highly secured private number. It was saved in my contacts under a generic landscaping service, but it bypassed standard cellular towers entirely. The line rang exactly twice before a crisp professional voice answered. "Good evening, Madam Chairman," Elias Thorne said. Elias was my lead corporate attorney and the fiercely loyal public face of Obsidian Trust. To the rest of the corporate world, Elias was the ruthless gatekeeper of a shadowy, highly aggressive venture capital firm based in Palo Alto. He was the only person in the financial sector who knew my true identity. Elias. I said, my voice cutting through the quiet hum of the car's air conditioning. It is time to execute the contingency protocol on Sterling Group. Every single asset. I heard the subtle shift in his breathing. There was a brief pause on the line as his fingers immediately began flying across a mechanical keyboard. Are you absolutely certain NIA triggering this specific clause will initiate an immediate unannounced capital recall? It will effectively gut their operational liquidity. The company will be entirely paralyzed before midnight. I have never been more certain of anything in my life, I replied, staring out through the windshield at the empty asphalt. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, letting the memory of 4 years ago wash over me. Marcus had been pacing the cramped living room of our modest starter home, sweating through his cheap dress shirt, sobbing with his head in his hands. His ambitious commercial development company was going under. He had over-leveraged his meager assets, taken out toxic loans, and was just days away from a humiliating, highly public bankruptcy. He had begged everyone in his network, every fraternity brother, every supposed mentor for a financial lifeline. They all slammed their doors in his face. That was when I stepped in. Not as a comforting wife offering empty words of encouragement, but as his ultimate savior. At 24, I had quietly sold a revolutionary medical technology patent I developed in college. I secured hundreds of millions of dollars in generational wealth. I kept the windfall completely separate from our marriage, hiding it behind layers of corporate veils to protect us from predators. When Marcus was drowning, I used those veils to funnel a massive life-saving capital injection into his failing business through Obsidian Trust. I demanded 75% controlling interest in exchange for the bailout. Marcus was so desperate, so blinded by his fear of failure, that he signed the aggressive restructuring paperwork without a second thought. The most pathetic part of it all was his fragile, inflated ego. For 4 years, Marcus had strutted around Atlanta's high society bragging on panels and podcast interviews about how a reclusive, brilliant white Silicon Valley billionaire believed in his vision so much that he cut a blank check. Marcus regularly sent expensive bottles of scotch, rare Cuban cigars, and sycophantic, groveling emails to Elias, practically begging him to pass along his profound gratitude to the mysterious patriarch of Obsidian. Marcus actually believed his raw masculine talent and business acumen had won over the tech elite. He never once suspected that the all-powerful, ruthless investor pulling his strings was the very woman he demanded make his dinner, the woman he actively belittled in front of his mother, the woman he was currently cheating on with her best friend, Elias. I continued, bringing my focus sharply back to the present. I want you to exercise our majority shareholder rights right now. Call in the entirety of the $585 million operational capital we currently have parked in their development escrow. I want those funds routed back to our primary holding accounts offshore. They have multiple active construction sites across the East Coast, Nia. Pulling that much liquidity without warning will trigger an automatic default on all their major contractor agreements. The system will throw a massive red flag. Marcus and his executive board will be notified by the automated banking software within minutes. That is exactly the point, I stated coldly. I also want you to activate the emergency audit clause. Send our most aggressive forensic accounting team to their headquarters first thing Monday morning. I want every single ledger torn apart piece by piece. Let us see exactly how much company money my husband and his brother-in-law have been bleeding to fund their personal indiscretions. Consider it done, Elias said, the rapid typing over the line accelerating. The wire recall sequence is initiated. The funds will clear our secured accounts in less than 10 minutes. Marcus is about to experience a catastrophic systemic failure. He built his throne on my foundation, I replied. Now I am pulling the floorboards out from under him. Have the legal team prepped and ready for a hostile boardroom takeover. I will be stepping out of the shadows very soon. I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. I leaned back and looked up through the sunroof at the dark, starless sky. The trap was set. The guillotine had been dropped. Sterling Group, the shiny beacon of Marcus's artificial success, was now financially dead. It was a hollow shell, drained of its lifeblood by a few keystrokes from a grocery store parking lot. I did not feel a shred of guilt. I had given him the world wrapped in a bow, and he had chosen to spit on it. He thought he was untouchable. He thought his money insulated him from the consequences of his actions. But he was about to learn a very brutal lesson about who actually owned the bank. I sat in the quiet isolation of my car and watched the digital clock on the dashboard slowly change. Exactly 15 minutes had passed since I gave Elias the final order. 15 minutes since $585 million vanished from the Sterling Group ledgers and safely returned to the impenetrable vault of Obsidian Trust. My phone had been sitting face down on the passenger seat. I reached over and flipped it upright. The screen instantly lit up the dark interior of the sedan, flashing with an absolute avalanche of notifications. The sheer volume of alerts made the device vibrate violently against my palm. 57 missed calls. I smiled. The number was beautiful in its precision. 40 of those calls were from Marcus. I could visualize his exact progression of panic. He likely walked out of his study, adjusted his suit, and tried to return to the party as if nothing had happened. He probably motioned for one of the event coordinators, intending to settle the massive catering bill with a casual swipe of his American Express Centurion card. I could almost see the smug look on his face morphing into confusion and then sheer outrage when the catering manager politely informed him the card was declined. He would have tried the backup cards next. Denied, denied, denied. He was calling me not to apologize but to demand answers. He probably thought I had gone to the bank in a hysterical fit of jealousy and tried to freeze our personal checking account. He thought this was a petty domestic dispute. He was blowing up my phone to exert his dominance, to scream at me, to fix the embarrassing situation he was facing in front of his elite guests. He had no idea his personal banking issues were microscopic compared to the tsunami crashing down on his corporate empire. The other 17 missed calls were from Connor. Connor was married to Marcus's older sister, Jasmine. As the chief financial officer of Sterling Group, Connor paraded around Atlanta playing the role of the brilliant white financial strategist who kept Marcus's ambitious projects grounded. Connor loved to talk down to me at family dinners, explaining basic economic concepts as if I were a child. He thrived on the illusion that he was the operational mastermind behind the company. But right now, Connor was not a mastermind. Connor was a man watching his entire professional existence burn to the ground. I knew exactly what was happening on his end. Connor's customized financial tracking software was designed to alert him to any major fluctuations in corporate liquidity. When my withdrawal executed, his phone and laptop would have triggered a catastrophic level red alert. $585 million was not just a line item. It was the lifeblood of their massive commercial construction projects across the East Coast. Without that capital, contractor auto payments were failing. Payroll accounts were completely drained. Escrow balances were showing absolute zero. Connor was calling Marcus in a sheer panic, desperate to understand why their silent billionaire investor had suddenly initiated a hostile capital recall. When Marcus failed to answer because he was too busy yelling at an American Express customer service representative, Connor resorted to calling me. He was frantically trying to track down his CEO, hoping the dutiful, quiet wife knew where her husband was hiding. The screen of my phone lit up again, an incoming call from Connor. I did not press ignore. I simply watched the caller ID flash, letting the device ring until it rolled over to voicemail. I enjoyed the visualization of Connor pacing his home office, sweating through his expensive golf shirt, hyperventilating as he stared at a computer screen showing multiple defaulted accounts. Seconds later, a text message from Connor appeared on my lock screen. The preview text was frantic, completely lacking his usual condescending professionalism. "Nia, I need you to find Marcus right now. It is an absolute emergency. The company accounts are completely frozen. Our investor just pulled everything without warning. We are in default. Please tell me you know where he is." I read the message twice, letting the sweet taste of absolute victory settle over me. They were drowning, grasping at air, completely unaware that the woman they both dismissed and disrespected was the one holding them underwater. Another text arrived, this one from Marcus. The tone was exactly what I expected. Aggressive, arrogant, and entirely focused on his own ego. Answer your phone right now. Whatever you did to my cards, undo it immediately. You are making me look like a fool in front of my guests. Do not make me come looking for you. He still thought he was the king of the house. He still believed he had the high ground. He was so blinded by his own narcissism that he could not connect his personal banking failure to the impending call he was about to receive from his terrified CFO. I did not reply to Marcus. I did not reply to Connor. Silence was my greatest weapon right now. Let them stew in the chaos. Let them tear each other apart trying to figure out how their flawless, untouchable empire had evaporated in the span of a 15-minute window. I reached back to check on Leo. He was still sleeping soundly in his car seat, completely undisturbed by the destruction of his father's false kingdom. I gently touched his small shoe, making a silent promise to him. I was not just burning down a toxic marriage today. I was cleansing his future. I would never let him grow up under the shadow of a man who valued his own ego over his family. I turned my phone on silent, tossed it into my leather tote bag, and put the car into drive. I slowly pulled out of the grocery store parking lot and merged onto the dark, quiet highway. I was not heading back to the Buckhead estate, and I certainly was not running away to hide in a cheap hotel. I was heading toward a highly secure luxury condominium I had purchased through a proxy corporation months ago. It was a fortress they knew absolutely nothing about. The first phase of the execution was complete. The financial life support had been completely severed. Tomorrow the sun would rise and the true nightmare for Marcus and Connor would officially begin. I pressed the accelerator, driving steadily into the night, ready for the attacks that were bound to follow. I pulled into the private subterranean garage of my secure condominium building. The heavy steel security gates slid shut behind my sedan, sealing me off from the chaos I had just unleashed across the city. I carefully lifted Leo from his car seat. His head rested softly against my shoulder, his steady breathing a grounding rhythm against the rapid ticking of my own pulse. I bypassed the main lobby entirely and took the private access elevator directly to the penthouse floor. The doors opened to a sprawling modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering Atlanta skyline. This was my true sanctuary. It was a fortress Marcus did not know existed, purchased entirely through a blind trust months ago, when I first suspected his financial recklessness, though I had not yet known about his infidelity. I laid Leo down in the custom nursery I had prepared, turning on the baby monitor before walking out to the main living area. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water, walked over to the expansive glass windows, and finally pulled my phone from my leather tote bag. The screen was still flooded with notifications, but one specific contact was forcefully trying to break through the blockade. Mama Brenda. She was calling back to back, absolutely refusing to be ignored. I knew exactly what Marcus had done. Unable to fix his frozen accounts, and too cowardly to face his furious guests, or his frantic chief financial officer, he had run straight to his mother to fight his domestic battles. He had undoubtedly spun a pathetic, twisted story about a crazy, jealous wife acting out of turn to ruin his special night. I took a slow sip of my water, walked over to the kitchen island, and pressed accept. I did not say hello. I simply tapped the recording icon on my secondary secure device lying on the counter. Mama Brenda did not wait for a greeting. Her voice exploded through the speaker, shrill and trembling with absolute unrestrained fury. "What exactly is wrong with you, little girl?" she shrieked, skipping any pretense of Southern hospitality. "My son is standing in the middle of his own estate, surrounded by half of Atlanta's elite, and his cards are declining. The caterers are threatening to pack up the food. You march your narrow behind down to whatever bank you called, and you fix this right now. Do you hear me? You are embarrassing my family." I stayed completely silent. I leaned against the cool marble countertop, watching the recording app capture every single aggressive spike in her audio wave. My silence only infuriated her further. She hated being ignored. She thrived on conflict, drama, and submission. Receiving absolutely none of those things was pushing her right to the edge of her sanity. "You think you are clever?" Mama Brenda continued, her voice dripping with venom. "You think throwing a little temper tantrum makes you powerful? Let me tell you exactly what you are. You are a stay-at-home nobody who hit the jackpot when my Marcus decided to settle for you. You brought absolutely nothing to this marriage except a pretty face and a modest background. Everything you wear, everything you eat, the very roof over your head, it all belongs to my son. You are a freeloader playing dress-up in a world you do not belong in. I traced the edge of my glass, fascinated by the sheer, unfiltered delusion pouring out of the speaker. She genuinely believed Marcus was the undisputed king of our reality. She believed her son was a self-made titan completely blind to the fact that his entire empire was currently dissolving into dust because I had removed my financial safety net. And so what if he was having a little fun in his study? She scoffed, confirming that Marcus had actually admitted to the affair. Yet she was still defending him. He is a wealthy, powerful, attractive man who carries the weight of a massive corporation on his back. Men of his caliber have needs. They have pressures you could not possibly comprehend with your little homemaker brain. A smart wife, a grateful wife, would look the other way. She would count her blessings that she gets to sleep in a mansion instead of a cheap apartment. But you decide to throw a jealous fit and mess with his money. Her willingness to casually dismiss her son kissing my best friend was revolting, but it was exactly what I needed. She was laying out every toxic, narcissistic trait of the Sterling family on a perfectly recorded silver platter. I am telling you this for your own good, Mama. Brenda hissed, her tone shifting to a menacing, patronizing whisper. You are going to unfreeze those accounts immediately. Then you are going to drive your cheap little car back to that house. You are going to get down on your knees, and you are going to beg my son for forgiveness. You will apologize to him for embarrassing him in front of his colleagues, and you will pray that he does not throw you out onto the street where you belong. If you ruin his reputation tonight, I will personally make sure you never see a single dime in the divorce. You will be walking out of that house with nothing but the clothes on your back. I let her rant for another full 2 minutes. I let her exhaust her vocabulary of insults threatening to ruin my life, threatening to take my son, and boasting about her son's untouchable massive wealth. This audio was not just proof of her cruelty. It was a masterpiece of evidence for the impending divorce and custody proceedings. No judge in the country would look at this recording and side with their family. She was handing me the exact ammunition my legal team needed to ensure Marcus never got unsupervised visitation with Leo. When she finally ran out of breath, waiting for me to cry, argue, or apologize, I simply leaned closer to the microphone. Are you finished, Brenda? I asked. My voice was terrifyingly calm, completely stripped of any daughter-in-law deference. I did not call her Mama. That privilege was officially permanently revoked. She gasped, completely caught off guard by the icy, unbothered detachment in my tone. How dare you speak to me like... I pressed the end call button, cutting her off mid-sentence. I saved the high-definition audio file, backed it up to 3 separate encrypted cloud servers, and forwarded a copy directly to Elias with a note to add it to the litigation file. The flying monkeys had officially been deployed, but they were flying completely blind. Mama Brenda thought she was protecting a billionaire, completely unaware that she was aggressively defending a man who was currently holding a $10 million deficit. The financial noose was tightening around their necks, and the next person to panic would be the one holding the company's fake ledger. I set the phone down on the pristine marble counter, taking a moment to appreciate the absolute silence of my penthouse. The frantic energy of my former life felt a million miles away. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out at the city lights. Atlanta was a city built on hustle and image. My husband and my best friend were currently scrambling to maintain both. The screen of my phone lit up again. It was not a call this time. It was a direct message on Instagram from a mutual college friend, a woman who usually stayed far away from drama. The message contained a single screenshot and a terrified question mark. I picked up the device and tapped the image. It was a screenshot of Chloe's Instagram story posted just minutes ago. I stared at the image, letting the sheer audacity of it wash over me. The photo was taken in the master bathroom of our Buckhead estate, my master bathroom. Chloe was standing in front of my custom vanity mirrors, posing with an aggressively arched back to show off her figure. She was still wearing the emerald green silk dress, though she had pulled the straps down further to look more provocative. Her arm was hooked tightly around Marcus. He was standing slightly behind her, looking directly into the mirror. His face was tense, the veins in his neck prominent, completely lacking his usual relaxed, wealthy aura. He looked like a man who knew he was standing on a landmine, but was trying his hardest to look like he owned the field. But it was the caption typed across the bottom of the photo in an elegant cursive font that truly highlighted the depth of Chloe's delusion. When a man finds a real queen, he throws away the maid. I read the words again, tracing the letters with my eyes. The maid. A sharp, genuine laugh escaped my lips, echoing off the high ceilings of my living room. It was not a laugh of pain or hysteria. It was the laugh of someone watching a spectacular slow-motion train wreck. Chloe had always possessed a desperate, clawing hunger for validation. We had met on the historic campus of Spelman College, two young black women navigating the pressures of higher education. Back then, Chloe was the girl who always had the loudest laugh, but never had the funds to cover her share of the dinner bill. I was the quiet, observant student with a full academic scholarship and a mind wired for algorithms and patents. I had paid for her textbooks when her financial aid fell through. I had bought her graduation dress so she would not feel out of place crossing the stage. I had spent a decade silently floating her lifestyle, always pretending I did not notice when she conveniently forgot her wallet. She had always coveted my life. When I sold my first tech patent and secured my private wealth, she was the only friend I told. I thought I was sharing a victory with my sister. Instead, I had planted a seed of bitter, deep-rooted envy in her heart. When I married Marcus, a man who possessed the loud, flashy wealth she had always worshipped, that envy had clearly mutated into an obsession. She did not just want a wealthy husband. She wanted my wealthy husband. She wanted my house, my status, and my perceived power. Calling me the maid was her ultimate psychological projection. For 10 years, she had felt like the charity case, the sidekick, the lesser friend operating in my shadow. This Instagram post was her grand public declaration of victory. In her twisted mind, she had finally overthrown the queen. She believed she had successfully stolen the king and secured her place on the throne. The comedic irony of the situation was almost too delicious to process. Chloe thought she had just secured a billionaire. She genuinely believed she was locking down a man with endless resources, private jets, and limitless credit limits. She was posing in a mansion she thought he owned, clinging to an empire she thought he built. She had absolutely no idea that she had just chained herself to a financial corpse. Marcus was a hollow shell of a man. His company accounts were completely drained. His construction sites were hours away from catastrophic defaults. His personal credit cards, including the shiny supplementary black card sitting inside Chloe's designer purse, were permanently frozen. He did not own the Buckhead estate. My holding company owned it. He did not own his luxury cars. My corporate fleet management account owned them. Marcus Sterling currently had $10 million in toxic personal debt and absolutely zero liquid assets. Chloe had not stolen a king. She had stolen a highly decorated peasant. By posting that photo, she had done me a massive legal favor. Georgia is an at-fault divorce state, and adultery is a highly relevant factor when dividing any potential marital assets. Not that Marcus had any left to divide. In her desperate rush to claim her public victory and humiliate me, she had documented his infidelity with a clear timestamp and a geographic location. She had provided undeniable written proof of their relationship to her thousands of followers. I did not feel a single pang of betrayal anymore. The friendship had died the moment I opened the door to that study. What remained was a purely tactical battlefield, and Chloe had just marched right into the crossfire without any armor. She wanted a public war. She wanted to play the role of the victorious mistress flaunting her stolen prize to the world. I took a high-resolution screenshot of the post. I saved the image directly to the secure legal folder on my encrypted drive. I drafted a quick, precise email to Elias and my lead divorce attorney, attaching the screenshot alongside the audio recording of Mama Brenda. My instructions were brief and devoid of emotion. Add this to the infidelity docket. Ensure her name is explicitly listed in the divorce filings as the primary co-respondent. I imagined Chloe sitting in my house refreshing her Instagram feed every 5 seconds, waiting for my reaction. She was probably expecting me to leave a devastated comment. She was hoping I would block her in a fit of tears or post a vague, heartbroken quote about betrayal. She wanted the satisfaction of knowing she had destroyed me. I gave her absolutely nothing. No reaction, no block, no response. My silence would be 1,000 times more agonizing for a narcissist like her than any screaming match. She would stay awake all night paranoid and wondering why the woman she had just publicly humiliated was not fighting back. She thought she had won the war because I walked away from the battlefield. She was completely oblivious to the fact that I had not surrendered. I had simply stepped back to watch the bombs detonate. Tomorrow morning, when the financial reality of Marcus's ruined empire finally crashed down on them, Chloe would realize the horrifying truth. The queen had not been dethroned. The queen had simply taken her money and left the maid to clean up the ruins. I closed the laptop and took a sip of my water, feeling a profound sense of peace. The first two pawns had made their moves and sealed their own fates. Now it was time to see what the rest of the rats would do when the ship started rapidly sinking. The digital clock glowing on the sleek oven display shifted to exactly midnight. The penthouse was completely silent, insulated high above the frantic energy of the city. My phone, sitting face up on the cool marble island, suddenly vibrated with a harsh, continuous buzz. It was not Marcus calling back. It was not Mama Brenda attempting another round of verbal abuse. The name flashing brightly on the screen belonged to a man who usually never bothered to acknowledge my existence outside of obligatory holiday dinners. It was Connor. Connor was married to Marcus's older sister, Jasmine. As the chief financial officer of Sterling Group, Connor paraded around Atlanta playing the role of the brilliant corporate strategist who kept Marcus's ambitious projects grounded. He was the classic corporate opportunist who had married into a successful black family and immediately acted as if he had single-handedly built their entire empire from the ground up. He loved wearing expensive fleece vests, drinking rare craft beer, and using exhausting corporate buzzwords to make himself sound indispensable. He consistently treated me not as a sister-in-law, but as an uneducated dependent who should be endlessly grateful for the immense wealth he supposedly managed for our family. The phone stopped ringing. A second later, a massive block of text flooded my lock screen. I did not pick up the device. I simply leaned over the counter, resting my hands on the marble, and read the messages as they illuminated the dark kitchen. Nia, I do not know what kind of childish game you are playing with Marcus tonight, but you need to unlock the banking accounts right now. This is not a request. This is a directive from the CFO of this family. I let out a slow, quiet breath. A directive. The absolute audacity of this man was staggering. He was attempting to use his corporate title to command a woman he believed was nothing more than a domestic accessory. A second message appeared immediately after the first. Marcus is currently unreachable, and your little domestic dispute is interfering with my ability to manage our financial infrastructure. You have frozen the primary cards and locked the routing accounts. Turn them back on immediately. You have no idea what you are doing. You are jeopardizing highly sensitive corporate liquidity. I analyzed his words carefully, dissecting the tone of his messages. He was trying his hardest to sound authoritative, trying to project the image of a powerful executive handling an unruly subordinate. But I could smell the absolute terror bleeding through the digital text. Connor was a man obsessed with absolute control and perfect grammar, yet his messages were riddled with frantic typos. The capitalization was erratic. The punctuation was aggressive and sloppy. He was not texting me from a place of power. He was texting me from a place of suffocating, blinding panic. He thought I had only frozen the personal accounts. He thought this was just a jealous, hysterical wife throwing a financial tantrum over an affair. He had absolutely no idea that the personal accounts were just collateral damage in a much larger war. The real reason he was panicking, the real reason he was sweating through his designer clothes in the middle of the night, was because the corporate ledgers of Sterling Group were currently reading absolute zero. Then the third message arrived. It was the longest one yet, and it crossed a boundary that completely eradicated any remaining shred of mercy I might have held for him. Listen to me very carefully, Nia. If you do not reverse this lockdown in the next 60 seconds, I will personally involve the Sterling Group legal team. You are an unemployed housewife with zero personal income. If you want to play hardball, I will have our corporate lawyers file an emergency injunction to strip you of your maternal rights. We will take full custody of Leo. You will be left on the street with absolutely nothing. Do not test me. Open the accounts right now. The moment I read my son's name, the temperature in the room seemed to plummet. The dark amusement I had felt while dealing with Mama Brenda and Chloe instantly evaporated, replaced by a cold, predatory fury. He was threatening my child. He was threatening to use the very wealth that I secretly provided to rip my 1-year-old son away from me. He genuinely believed that his position as a wealthy executive gave him the ultimate power to crush a mother who he deemed financially worthless. He thought he could bully me into submission by weaponizing the legal system against me. What Connor did not realize was that the legal team he was threatening me with was paid entirely by my capital. The corporate law firm he planned to use was on a massive retainer funded using cash routed directly from Obsidian Trust. He was threatening to shoot me using my own unloaded gun. I stared at the threatening message, feeling a dead, terrifying calm wash over my entire being. Connor was completely delusional. He was trying to bully me into unlocking a few $100,000 in personal funds because he was desperately trying to patch the massive gaping hole I had just blown into his corporate ship. I knew exactly why he was so frantic, and it went far deeper than just protecting Marcus's company. This was about saving his own skin. As the chief financial officer, Connor had unfettered access to the operational accounts. For months, my proxy financial analysts at Obsidian Trust had noticed strange, subtle anomalies in the Sterling Group expense reports. Small fractional diversions of cash that were cleverly disguised as consulting fees and contractor overages. Connor was bleeding the company dry. He was a man with a severe gambling addiction, completely indebted to dangerous high rollers in Las Vegas. He had been quietly funneling millions of dollars out of the corporate escrow to cover his massive personal losses, relying on the massive cushion of my investment capital to hide his tracks from the auditors. Now that the $585 million had vanished, the tide had completely rolled out, exposing his naked, fraudulent bookkeeping to the world. There was no more cash to shuffle around to hide the missing money. There was no more financial buffer. Connor was staring down the barrel of a federal indictment, and he knew it. He needed those personal accounts unlocked because he needed liquid cash to flee or to pay off the dangerous people he owed before the sun came up. He was a drowning man screaming at the ocean to stop rising. He thought intimidating a stay-at-home mother was his easiest path to survival. He thought I was a weak, vulnerable target who would easily fold under the threat of losing her child. He had absolutely no idea that he had just threatened the apex predator of this entire financial ecosystem. I picked up the phone. The cool metal of the device felt heavy and solid in my hand. I did not type out an emotional paragraph defending my role as a mother. I did not argue with him about my rights. I did not engage with his pathetic attempts at intimidation. He wanted a war, and he was about to get a total massacre. I opened the messaging app on my phone and pulled up Connor's frantic, threatening block of text. My fingers hovered over the digital keyboard for just a moment. I did not type out an emotional defense of my capabilities as a mother. I did not hurl insults about his fragile masculinity or his desperate need to feel important. I did not engage in a petty back-and-forth argument with a man who is already standing on the gallows. I simply typed 2 brief, devastating sentences. You should worry about your own ledgers, Connor. The forensic audit team from Obsidian Trust will be waiting at your office door first thing tomorrow morning. I pressed send. I watched the tiny delivery indicator illuminate on the screen, confirming that the message had successfully reached his device. I did not wait for his reply. I did not wait to see the typing bubble appear. I immediately opened his contact profile and blocked his number. I went down my contact list and blocked Marcus. I blocked Mama Brenda. I blocked Chloe. I blocked every single member of their toxic parasitic inner circle. The absolute, heavy digital silence that followed was the most beautiful thing I had ever experienced. I set the phone down on the cold marble counter, picturing the exact sequence of events that was about to unfold miles away. Connor was a coward wearing a custom-tailored suit. He projected the image of an untouchable corporate shark, but underneath the expensive cologne and the arrogant posturing, he was nothing more than a desperate, degenerate gambler. I could perfectly visualize the exact moment my text message illuminated his screen. I could see him standing in his lavish home office, a glass of rare bourbon in his hand, feeling smug and victorious for threatening a woman he deemed powerless. Then his eyes would lock onto the words Obsidian Trust. The blood would instantly drain from his face. His heart would slam against his ribs with enough force to crack bone. The glass of bourbon would slip from his trembling fingers, shattering against his imported hardwood floors. The terrifying, undeniable mathematics would instantly click together in his panicked brain. The frozen personal accounts, the sudden catastrophic disappearance of $585 million in corporate liquidity, and now the quiet, stay-at-home sister-in-law casually dropping the classified name of their anonymous billionaire investor in a text message. It was not a coincidence. It was a coordinated, highly lethal, and perfectly executed financial strike. Connor would realize in that exact fraction of a second that I was not just a scorned wife throwing a domestic tantrum. I was the executioner. I was the apex predator who owned the very ground he walked on. He would tear through his desk drawers, pulling up his encrypted spreadsheets, hyperventilating, as the reality of his situation crushed the air out of his lungs. Every single fake invoice he had generated, every phantom contractor he had paid, every offshore wire transfer he had authorized to cover his massive crippling debts at the casinos in Las Vegas. He thought he was an evil genius hiding his embezzlement within the massive cash flow of Marcus's company. He thought the invisible white billionaire in Silicon Valley would never notice a few missing millions. Now he knew the billionaire was a black woman sitting across from him at Thanksgiving dinner, and she had seen every single stolen dime. Connor thought he was threatening me with a family court lawyer. He was actually staring down the barrel of a federal indictment, a multi-million-dollar restitution order, and a lengthy sentence in a federal penitentiary. Fear is a highly contagious virus, and Connor was about to infect the entire Sterling family. He would not care about Marcus's infidelity anymore. He would not care about Mama Brenda's social standing or the reputation of the family name. Driven by pure, unadulterated terror, Connor would frantically dial Marcus. He would bypass the pleasantries and scream into the phone that the company was dead. He would scream that the untouchable investor had pulled the plug and that the auditors were coming to lock the doors. I turned away from the kitchen island and walked slowly through the quiet penthouse, letting my mind drift to the Buckhead estate. The grand birthday party, designed solely to showcase Marcus's limitless wealth, was undoubtedly collapsing into a spectacular display of public humiliation. The caterers, realizing the credit cards on file were coming back completely declined, would start packing up their silver chafing dishes and gourmet appetizers. The string quartet, demanding their payment for the evening, would pack their instruments and leave the floral archway empty. The wealthy guests, the real estate tycoons, and the country club elite would sense the shifting energy. They would see Marcus red-faced and sweating, screaming into his phone as Connor delivered the fatal corporate news. The flawless image of the self-made titan would shatter right there on the manicured lawn, leaving nothing but a desperate, broke man standing in a rented mansion. And Chloe. The thought of my treacherous former best friend brought a cold, satisfied smile to my face. Chloe, who had just posted her victorious photograph claiming she had stolen the king and thrown away the maid. She would be standing in the middle of the collapsing circus, desperately trying to maintain the illusion of her newly acquired high society status. When the valets demanded their fees, or when a frustrated vendor approached her, she would confidently open her designer purse. She would pull out that shiny supplementary black card, fully expecting the heavy metal to command respect. She would hand it over with a smug smile, only to be met with a harsh, humiliating decline. She would try it again. Denied. She would look around for Marcus to save her to validate her position as the new queen of the estate, but Marcus would be completely ignoring her too, consumed by the evaporation of his entire corporate identity to care about his mistress. In that deeply embarrassing, painfully public moment, Chloe would realize the horrifying truth. She had not secured a spot on a luxury yacht. She had handcuffed herself to the anchor of a sinking ship. She was left holding a worthless piece of plastic standing next to a man with $10 million in personal debt. I walked into the master suite and opened the doors to my expansive walk-in closet. I ran my fingers over the row of impeccably tailored business suits. I selected a sharp, structured blazer in a deep, commanding charcoal gray, pairing it with tailored trousers and a crisp silk blouse. I laid the outfit out for the morning, admiring the sharp lines and the unforgiving silhouette. This was not the wardrobe of a submissive homemaker. This was the armor of a corporate titan preparing for a hostile takeover. I checked the time. It was past 1 in the morning. In just a few hours, the sun would rise over Atlanta. Marcus and Connor would undoubtedly attempt to stage a desperate, chaotic emergency board meeting at the Sterling Group headquarters. They would gather their remaining executives, scrambling to find a way to contact the mysterious Obsidian Trust, begging for a grace period, praying for a financial miracle to keep their doors open and keep the federal authorities at bay. They would try to spin a narrative of a temporary banking error. They would try to lie their way out of the grave they had dug for themselves. I walked over to the nursery and looked down at Leo. He was sleeping deeply, completely safe, and entirely insulated from the destruction of his father's toxic legacy. I gently adjusted his soft blanket. I had secured his future today. He would never have to learn how to shrink himself to accommodate a fragile, narcissistic man. He would grow up knowing exactly what strength, integrity, and absolute power looked like. I walked back to my bedroom and sent one final encrypted message to Elias. Confirm the security detail for 8 in the morning. Have the legal team assembled in the lobby of Sterling Group headquarters. We are not negotiating. We are liquidating. Elias replied within seconds. Everything is locked and loaded, Madam Chairman. They have absolutely no idea what is about to walk through their front doors. I turned off the bedside lamp, plunging the room into comfortable darkness. My heart rate was steady. My conscience was completely clear. Marcus had demanded that I accept his betrayal or step out of his house. I had chosen to step out of his house, and in doing so, I had taken the entire foundation of his world with me. Tomorrow, I would not be returning as a broken, crying wife begging for an explanation. I would be walking into his boardroom as the sole owner, the primary creditor, and the architect of his absolute ruin. I closed my eyes and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, ready to burn the rest of his empire to the ground. The camera angle shifted low, looking up at the towering glass and steel monument to Marcus Sterling's ego. It was exactly 7 in the morning. Inside the executive boardroom on the 50th floor, the atmosphere was suffocating. I knew exactly what was happening behind those frosted glass doors because I was currently standing in the adjacent security control room, watching the live surveillance feed with perfect high-definition audio. The angle of the camera mounted in the corner of the boardroom captured Marcus standing at the head of the massive mahogany table. From that low vantage point, he looked like a titan trying to hold up a collapsing sky. His bespoke suit was perfectly pressed, but his posture was rigid, his shoulders tight with barely concealed panic. The emergency board meeting had been called at 4 in the morning. The senior partners and executive directors sat around the table, their faces pale and drawn, clutching untouched cups of coffee. They were older, seasoned real estate veterans who had weathered market crashes, but none of them had ever seen a financial hemorrhage like the one that had occurred overnight. To Marcus's right sat Connor. My brother-in-law looked like a dead man breathing. His usual smug corporate swagger was entirely gone. He was sweating profusely, his fingers trembling so violently that he kept his hands flat against the polished wood table to hide the shaking. He knew the truth. He knew that the sudden catastrophic withdrawal of $585 million was not an accident. He knew that the forensic audit team was likely already in the building. He was a cornered rat waiting for the exterminator. Yet the most absurd element in that room of terrified executives was not the impending bankruptcy, it was the woman sitting to Marcus's left. Chloe. She had actually shown up. After the absolute humiliation of the declined credit cards at the birthday party, she had stubbornly clung to her delusional fantasy. She was wearing a tailored white blazer and a severe pencil skirt, clearly trying to project the image of a high-powered corporate shark. She sat with her legs crossed, holding a sleek tablet, looking around the room with an expression of unearned superiority. She was playing house in a burning building. Marcus cleared his throat, leaning his knuckles against the table to project authority. He looked directly at his terrified board of directors and lied through his teeth. "Gentlemen, I appreciate you gathering on such short notice." Marcus began, his voice booming with forced confidence. "We are experiencing a temporary routing anomaly with our primary liquidity provider, Obsidian Trust. It is a minor technical issue related to international wire protocols. Our funds are completely secure. The banking software simply triggered an automated safeguard." A collective murmur of disbelief rippled through the executives. One of the senior partners, a man who had been with the company since its inception, slammed his hand on the table. "A routing anomaly," the partner asked, his voice rising in anger. "Marcus, every single one of our contractor escrow accounts just zeroed out. Payroll is bouncing. The banks are threatening to lock the doors on our active construction sites by noon. This is not a glitch. Obsidian Trust initiated a total hostile capital recall. They pulled everything." Why did they pull everything? Marcus tightened his jaw, his ego refusing to accept the reality of the situation. He could not admit that he had no idea who controlled Obsidian Trust. He could not admit that he had spent the last 5 hours desperately calling Elias Thorne, only to be sent to a generic voicemail. "I am in direct communication with their legal team," Marcus lied, his voice dropping to a harsh, intimidating register. "I have built a flawless relationship with the patriarch of Obsidian. We are handling the optics. In fact, to ensure our public image remains immaculate during this brief transition, I have brought on a new executive." Marcus gestured toward Chloe. The board members turned their heads, staring at her with blatant confusion and disdain. "This is Chloe Davis," Marcus announced, puffing out his chest. "She is joining us effective immediately as our strategic public relations advisor. She will be managing the external messaging to ensure our shareholders and contractors remain confident while we resolve this banking error." Connor looked up, his bloodshot eyes widening in absolute disbelief. He stared at Marcus as if his CEO had completely lost his mind. Connor knew they were facing federal indictments, and Marcus was using this catastrophic board meeting to hand out a fake vanity title to his mistress. Chloe offered a practiced hollow smile to the room. She tapped her manicured nails against her tablet, leaning forward to address the seasoned real estate tycoons. "Thank you, Marcus," Chloe said, using her most polished artificial corporate voice. "The key here is narrative control. We need to project strength and stability. I have drafted several press releases framing this as a strategic corporate restructuring. We will control the media cycle before anyone can speculate about liquidity issues. It is all about branding." The senior partner let out a harsh, barking laugh of pure disbelief. "Branding," the partner yelled, pointing a shaking finger at Chloe. "Who the hell are you? We are 48 hours away from missing a massive loan covenant, and the CEO brings his girlfriend into a closed emergency session to talk about press releases. Marcus, get her out of this room right now." "Excuse me." Chloe snapped, her facade dropping instantly as her entitlement flared up. "I am an executive advisor. You do not speak to me like that. Shut your mouth." Connor suddenly exploded, his voice cracking with hysteria. Everyone jumped. Connor shot up from his chair, knocking it backward. He slammed his fists on the table, pointing at Marcus. "Stop lying to them, Marcus. Stop lying to yourself. This is not a glitch." Connor screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "Obsidian Trust is not a friendly partner. They are liquidating us. I have been locked out of the master routing system since midnight. Elias Thorne is not returning our calls because he is currently preparing to seize our entire portfolio." Marcus stepped towards Connor, his chest puffed out, reverting to raw physical intimidation. "You are acting like a coward, Connor. Sit down and shut up." I am the CEO of this company. I control the board. I will fix this. I always fix this. You cannot fix this, Connor wailed, grabbing his own hair in a gesture of pure, unadulterated madness. You do not understand what is happening. Someone tipped them off. Someone showed them the books. The auditors are coming. They are going to see everything, Marcus. Every single dime. We are going to federal prison. The boardroom erupted into total chaos. The senior partners began shouting over each other, demanding to know what Connor meant by seeing the books. Marcus was screaming at Connor to regain his composure. Chloe was standing up, yelling at the executives to respect her authority, completely oblivious to the fact that she was demanding respect on a sinking ship. I watched the surveillance monitor in the security room, a cold, satisfied smile spreading across my face. They were tearing each other to pieces. The pressure cooker was functioning perfectly. Marcus was desperately clinging to his delusion of power, blinded by his own narcissism. Connor was breaking under the weight of his criminal embezzlement, and Chloe was standing right in the middle of the crossfire, wearing a white blazer she could not afford, trying to play corporate strategy with men who were about to lose everything. I turned away from the monitor and looked at Elias, who was standing quietly beside me in the dim control room. He was impeccably dressed in a sharp navy suit, holding a thick leather-bound portfolio containing the instruments of their absolute destruction. Behind him stood a team of 6 highly aggressive corporate litigators and 4 armed private security contractors. "It is time," I said softly. Elias offered a brief, respectful nod. "We are ready when you are, Madam Chairman." I adjusted the cuffs of my tailored charcoal blazer. I smoothed down the front of my trousers, ensuring every single line of my silhouette projected pure, unyielding dominance. I walked out of the security room and stepped into the long glass-walled corridor that led directly to the executive boardroom. My heels clicked rhythmically against the polished marble floor, the sound echoing like the steady, inescapable ticking of a countdown clock. I was not walking into that room as a betrayed wife. I was not walking in as a scorned woman looking for an apology or an explanation. I was walking in as the sole proprietor of their reality. They were desperately searching for the mysterious investor who held their fate in his hands. It was time to finally introduce them to the woman who owned the bank. The heavy frosted glass doors to the executive boardroom did not just open. They were pushed apart with a forceful, synchronized precision by 2 of my armed security contractors. The heavy thud of the doors hitting the wall stoppers echoed like a gunshot. The chaotic shouting inside the room ceased immediately. Every single head snapped toward the entrance. I stepped over the threshold. My posture was absolute iron. I did not look like the quiet, accommodating wife who served them dinner or managed their household schedules. Flanked by Elias and 6 of the most ruthless corporate litigators on the eastern seaboard, all dressed in immaculate black suits, I looked exactly like the corporate executioner I had come to be. Marcus stopped mid-sentence. His eyes darted from me to the security personnel lining the hallway behind me. The cognitive dissonance on his face was almost painful to watch. His brain simply could not process why his submissive wife was standing in his high-security corporate boardroom, accompanied by a highly tactical legal team. He slammed his open palm violently against the mahogany table. The untouched coffee cups rattled in their saucers. "What is the meaning of this?" Marcus bellowed, his voice echoing off the glass walls. "Who let you in here? Security. Get this woman out of my building right now." Chloe leaned back in her plush leather chair. She crossed her arms, a smug, deeply satisfied smirk spreading across her face. She actually thought I had lost my mind. She genuinely believed I was acting like a hysterical, scorned woman making a desperate, pathetic scene at her husband's workplace. She saw my arrival as the ultimate validation of her victorious narrative. "Marcus, please handle your wife," Chloe said, projecting her artificial corporate voice to sound authoritative. "We are in the middle of a critical strategy session. She is severely embarrassing herself and disrupting company protocol." I did not even look at Chloe. She was a microscopic insect buzzing near my boot. I raised my right hand, lifting a single finger. The 4 private security contractors immediately stepped inside the boardroom. They pulled the heavy double doors completely shut. The distinct, heavy click of the deadbolt locking echoed through the silent room. Two guards positioned themselves solidly in front of the exit, folding their hands behind their backs. The perimeter was entirely secured. Nobody was leaving this room until I allowed it. Connor was still standing near his knocked-over chair. He looked at the locked doors, then looked at the security team, and finally locked his bloodshot eyes on me. The color completely drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. Unlike Marcus, Connor recognized the high-end tactical security detail. He recognized Elias Thorne, the man he had been frantically trying to call all morning. Connor suddenly remembered the terrifying text message I had sent him at midnight. He remembered the specific threat about the forensic audit team. Connor's knees buckled slightly, and he slowly sank back into his chair, completely paralyzed by a sudden crushing wave of absolute terror. He was the very first person in the room to connect the dots. Marcus, however, was still utterly blinded by his own raging ego. He marched around the large conference table, striding aggressively toward me. His face was turning a dangerous shade of crimson. He pointed a thick finger directly at my face, attempting to exert the same physical dominance he had used in his study just yesterday. "I told you to accept the situation or leave my house," Marcus snarled, his voice dropping to a vicious, threatening register. "I did not tell you to bring a circus to my company. You have crossed a line you cannot uncross, Nia. I will call the police and have you arrested for trespassing. Get out of my sight." He tried to close the remaining distance between us, attempting to grab my arm just like he had done before. He never made it. Two of my security contractors stepped seamlessly in front of me, forming an impenetrable human wall. They did not draw weapons, but their physical presence was massive and completely immovable. Marcus stopped dead in his tracks, his chest heaving as he stared at the men blocking his path. He was finally realizing that his loud voice and physical intimidation tactics were entirely useless here. The senior partner at the far end of the table stood up, his face red with a mixture of confusion and boiling anger. "Marcus, what the hell is going on here?" the partner demanded. "Who are these people? We are dealing with a catastrophic financial crisis. We are hours away from total corporate default, and you are having a domestic dispute in the middle of the boardroom. Have you completely lost your mind?" Elias stepped forward smoothly, bypassing Marcus, as if my husband were nothing more than a piece of furniture. Elias walked directly to the head of the conference table and placed his thick leather-bound portfolio down on the polished wood. He unbuttoned his suit jacket with practiced elegance, his demeanor radiating absolute authority. "Gentlemen," Elias said, his voice calm, resonant, and commanding absolute attention. "I apologize for the abrupt entrance. However, I can assure you that this is not a domestic dispute. This is a mandatory administrative intervention." Marcus scoffed, scrambling to regain control of his room. "Who do you think you are?" Marcus shouted, pointing at Elias. "You cannot just walk into my headquarters and hijack my board meeting. I am the CEO of this company. I dictate who speaks in this room." Elias did not look at Marcus. He did not acknowledge the outburst at all. He addressed the senior partners and the board of directors directly. "My name is Elias Thorne," he stated clearly. "I am the lead legal counsel and executive proxy for Obsidian Trust." The name dropped into the center of the boardroom like an active live grenade. The entire room inhaled sharply. The senior partners sat up straight, their eyes widening in sudden desperate hope mixed with absolute terror. Connor put his head between his knees, gripping his own hair. Chloe looked around, clearly confused by the sudden dramatic shift in the room's energy. She was completely ignorant of the massive financial implications attached to that specific name. Marcus froze entirely. His mouth fell slightly open. The angry, intimidating husband vanished instantly, replaced by a desperate, groveling businessman who suddenly realized his savior had just walked through the door. "Mr. Thorne." Marcus stammered, his voice cracking as he rapidly changed his entire posture. "Elias, we have been trying to reach you all morning. Thank God you are here. There has been a terrible misunderstanding with the routing accounts. The automated system must have triggered an error. We just need to speak with the primary investor to clear up this software glitch immediately before it damages our operational timeline." I stepped out from behind my security detail. The guard smoothly parted, allowing me a clear, unobstructed path. I walked slowly toward the conference table, my eyes locked dead onto Marcus. The clicking of my heels was the only sound in the room. I stopped right next to Elias, looking down at my husband, who was still desperately trying to comprehend why I was standing next to his ultimate lifeline. "There is no software glitch, Marcus," I said, my voice steady, cold, and echoing with absolute finality. "And there is absolutely no misunderstanding." Marcus stared at me, his brow furrowing as his brain actively rejected the words coming out of my mouth. He looked back at Elias, pointing a trembling finger in my direction. "Mr. Thorne," Marcus said, his voice laced with a desperate, pleading arrogance. "I do not know how my wife got in contact with your office, but you need to ignore whatever she is saying. She is having a mental breakdown. She is just a homemaker. Now please, can we discuss the capital recall?" Elias did not even blink. He reached into his leather-bound portfolio and pulled out a stack of heavily watermarked legal documents. He placed them deliberately in the center of the mahogany table, right in front of the senior partners. "I am not here to negotiate with you, Marcus," Elias said, his tone utterly devoid of respect. "I am here executing the direct orders of my employer. Gentlemen of the board, allow me to formally introduce the sole founder, primary capital provider, and chairman of Obsidian Trust. She currently holds a 75% controlling interest in Sterling Group and acts as your largest single creditor." The silence that fell over the executive boardroom was so heavy it felt like physical pressure. It was not just quiet. It was the absolute breathless void that exists right before a devastating impact. Marcus stopped breathing. The last remaining drops of color drained instantly from his face, leaving his skin a sickly pale gray. His jaw went completely slack. He stared at me, his eyes wide and unblinking, as if he were looking at a ghost. The imposing, untouchable titan of Atlanta real estate was suddenly reduced to a terrified small man. He took a stumbling step backward, his polished leather shoes scraping loudly against the floor. Behind him, Chloe physically recoiled. She bumped hard into the glass wall, her tablet slipping from her sweaty hands and clattering loudly onto the floor. Her flawless makeup suddenly looked like a cheap mask. The arrogant, victorious smirk she had been wearing just moments ago was entirely gone, replaced by a look of profound, agonizing horror. She opened her mouth to speak, but only a pathetic, stuttering gasp escaped her throat. The woman she had publicly branded a maid was the billionaire she thought she was stealing. Connor let out a broken, miserable sob from his chair. He buried his face in his hands, rocking back and forth. He had already figured it out last night, but hearing it spoken aloud in the boardroom made the federal prison sentence suddenly very real. "This is a joke," Marcus whispered. His voice was incredibly weak, entirely stripped of its usual booming authority. "This is a sick, elaborate joke. My wife does not have money. She does not know anything about commercial real estate. She bakes cookies and plans play dates." I stepped closer to the table, resting my hands flat against the cool mahogany. I leaned in, forcing Marcus to look directly into my eyes. "You really never paid attention to anything outside of your own reflection, did you?" I asked, my voice cutting through the room like a razor. "You loved bragging about your brilliant self-made success. You loved standing on stages and telling young entrepreneurs how you pulled yourself up from the dirt. You never once stopped to question how a miracle investor suddenly appeared 4 years ago with exactly the right amount of capital to save you from a catastrophic bankruptcy." Marcus shook his head side to side, trying to deny the reality that was crushing him. "You do not have that kind of capital," he stammered. "I sold a proprietary medical technology patent when I was 24 years old." I stated clearly, projecting my voice so every single senior partner in the room could hear me. "I secured hundreds of millions of dollars before I even met you. I hid my wealth behind Obsidian Trust because I wanted a quiet, normal life. I wanted a husband who loved me, for me, not for my bank accounts. When you were crying in our living room 4 years ago, begging the universe for a bailout, I instructed Elias to save your company. I gave you the throne you are currently sitting on." A collective gasp echoed from the board members. The senior partner who had yelled at Marcus earlier looked at me with a sudden, profound reverence. The power dynamic in the room flipped instantaneously. The executives realized they were not looking at a disruptive spouse. They were looking at their absolute boss. "You lied to me," Marcus whispered, his voice cracking as tears of pure panic welled in his eyes. "You lied to me for our entire marriage. I protected my assets from a reckless, arrogant man who spends money faster than he earns it," I corrected sharply. "And looking at the state of your ledgers, it was the best financial decision I ever made. I trusted you with my heart, and you repaid me by bringing your mistress into the company I bought for you." At the mention of her name, all eyes turned to Chloe. She was practically hyperventilating against the glass wall. She realized in real time that her grand victory was a total illusion. The man she had slept with had absolutely nothing. He was just a highly paid employee of the woman she had betrayed. "Nia, please," Chloe stuttered, her voice high-pitched and frantic. "You have to understand. Marcus told me you two were basically separated. He told me he was the one providing everything. I did not know. I swear I did not know." I turned my gaze to Chloe, examining her pathetic, desperate display. "Do not insult my intelligence, Chloe. You posted a photo in my bathroom last night calling me a maid. You knew exactly what you were doing. You thought you hit the jackpot. You wanted the mansion, the cars, and the black card. Well, I hope you enjoyed the trial run, because the subscription has been officially canceled." Chloe burst into tears, sliding down the glass wall until she was crouching on the floor, weeping loudly into her hands. The image of the fierce corporate strategist she tried to project just 5 minutes earlier was completely decimated. Marcus fell heavily into his leather executive chair. He looked like a man who had just been hit by a freight train. He looked at Elias, then at the security guards, and finally back at me. His entire identity, his pride, his public image, everything was built on a foundation I owned. He was utterly powerless. "What do you want?" Nia Marcus asked. His tone defeated, finally dropping the alpha male facade. "Do you want me to apologize? Do you want to take over the daily operations? Just tell me what you want to fix this." I stood up straight, signaling to my legal team. The time for discussion was officially over. "I do not want to fix anything, Marcus," I said, my voice completely devoid of any warmth or mercy. "I am here to liquidate the garbage. Gentlemen of the board, please take your seats. We have a lot of corporate restructuring to do this morning, and we are going to start by taking out the trash." The senior partners immediately scrambled to sit down, pulling out their notepads and giving me their absolute undivided attention. Marcus sat frozen at the head of the table, realizing with horrifying clarity that the meeting was proceeding, but he was no longer the one running it. He was now the primary target on the agenda. To anyone watching the scene unfold, the focus whipped in a rapid, dizzying motion across the room, capturing the exact horrifying realization, setting into the faces of the people who had tried to break me. The invisible camera snapped first to Connor, whose head was still buried in his trembling hands, a man completely consumed by his impending federal nightmare. It whipped next to Chloe, still crouched pathetically against the frosted glass wall, her flawless makeup ruined by raw regret and sheer terror. Finally, the focus snapped directly onto Marcus, zooming in close on his sweat-beaded forehead and his hollow, terrified eyes, before slowly pulling back to reveal the entire scope of the boardroom. The pullback widened the frame, establishing me standing at the absolute center of the mahogany table, commanding the space with absolute unyielding authority. I reached over to Elias, taking the thick, heavy black dossier from his hands. I lifted it high enough for Marcus to see the obsidian trust seal embossed on the cover, then slammed it down onto the center of the table. The sharp, violent smack of the heavy folder hitting the wood made Marcus physically jump in his plush leather executive chair. "Yesterday afternoon, you stood in your study and gave me an ultimatum." I began, my voice cold and echoing off the glass walls. "You grabbed my wrist. You looked me in the eye. You told me that you were the king of the house, the sole provider, and that I had to either accept your infidelity or pack up my son and step out of the home you bought with your hard work." Marcus stared at the dossier, his chest heaving. He opened his mouth to formulate an excuse, a plea for mercy, but the words died in his throat. I tapped my manicured fingernail against the leather cover of the folder. "Did you ever actually read the deed to the Buckhead estate, Marcus?" Did you ever bother to look past your own massive ego to see whose name was actually on the property holding documents? Marcus swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. It is in the company trust, he whispered, his voice trembling. I put it in the Sterling real estate holding account for tax purposes. You put it in an account managed by a subsidiary of Obsidian Trust, I corrected him sharply, enjoying the sheer terror washing over his features. I own that subsidiary. I own the deed. I own the manicured lawn, where your mother insulted me, the driveway, where you park your leased luxury cars, and the very study where you kissed my best friend. You told me to step out of my house, Marcus. You do not even own the doormat. You are a guest in my home, and your invitation has officially been permanently revoked. The senior partners sitting around the table remained absolutely silent, furiously taking notes on their legal pads. They were watching the systematic dismantling of their former CEO with a mixture of awe and professional self-preservation. None of them dared to intervene. But we are not just here to discuss your eviction from my property, I continued, opening the dossier and pulling out a crisp, highlighted legal contract. We are here to discuss your eviction from this building. Elias stepped forward, perfectly synchronized with my command. As the primary capital provider for Sterling Group, Obsidian Trust structured the initial bailout agreement with highly specific protective covenants, Elias stated, addressing the board of directors. Section 4, paragraph 7 outlines a comprehensive morality clause. This clause dictates that any executive officer found engaging in behavior that brings public disgrace, ethical compromise, or reputational damage to the firm is subject to immediate uncompensated termination. Marcus bolted upright in his chair, his eyes wide with sudden, desperate panic. You cannot enforce that. A private marital issue does not trigger a corporate morality clause. You cannot fire the founder of the company over a personal dispute. I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound that cut right through his delusion. A private marital issue. Marcus, your new strategic public relations advisor, literally posted a photograph of your affair inside my master bathroom on social media last night. She broadcasted your infidelity complete with a geographical tag and a boastful caption to thousands of followers. You brought your mistress into the company headquarters this morning. You paraded her in front of your executive board during a catastrophic financial crisis. You have severely compromised the ethical standing and the public reputation of this firm. I slid the highlighted contract directly across the mahogany table until it hit Marcus's hands. The morality clause is officially triggered. I announced my tone, leaving absolutely no room for debate. As the majority shareholder, I am exercising my unilateral right to terminate your employment. You are fired, Marcus, effective immediately. You are no longer the CEO of Sterling Group. You have no authority, no salary, and no office in this building. Marcus grabbed the edge of the table, his knuckles turning stark white. He looked like a man gasping for oxygen in a vacuum. Nia, please. You cannot do this. This company is my entire life. I built the brand. I built the network. If you fire me, I walk away with nothing. I still have my vested shares. You have to buy me out. You legally have to buy me out of my founder's equity. Elias adjusted his glasses, looking down at Marcus with pure clinical detachment. That is incorrect, Mr. Sterling. The termination under the morality clause explicitly triggers the forfeiture of all unvested and vested executive compensation. Your shares are entirely revoked and returned to the company treasury. You are entitled to absolutely zero buyout compensation. The reality of his total financial annihilation finally slammed into Marcus. He was not just losing his job, he was being stripped of his entire net worth. Every single share of stock, every bonus, every ounce of equity he thought he possessed was completely wiped out by his own arrogance. And let us not forget your personal balance sheet, I added, leaning in closer, refusing to let him look away from the destruction he had caused. You lived a lifestyle you could not afford, Marcus. You leveraged your future earnings to fund private jets, custom watches, and designer gifts for your mistress. Without your CEO salary, and with your personal accounts permanently frozen under my fraud investigation, you currently hold over $10 million in unsecured personal debt. You are bankrupt. You have no house, no cars, no company, and no money. You are completely and utterly destitute. Marcus opened his mouth, but a pathetic broken wheeze was the only sound he could produce. The man who had demanded total submission from me yesterday was now visibly crumbling, reduced to a hollow, penniless shell. He slumped forward in his leather chair, staring blankly at the polished mahogany table, the sheer magnitude of his ruin breaking his spirit into pieces. The execution was precise, lethal, and entirely legal. I had systematically dismantled his empire brick by brick, without raising my voice or shedding a single tear. I had turned his greatest pride into his ultimate downfall. But I was not finished yet. Marcus was only the first target on my list. The financial guillotine had fallen on the CEO, but the chief financial officer was next in line, and his crimes were far worse than simple infidelity. I turned my gaze away from the hollow shell of the man I once called my husband. The air in the boardroom had grown freezing cold, heavy with the stench of ruined egos. I locked eyes directly with Connor. Connor was practically melting into his expensive leather chair. The arrogant chief financial officer, who had confidently sipped craft beer at my Thanksgiving table, who had patronizingly explained basic interest rates to me while I silently funded his entire paycheck, was now visibly shaking. Sweat dripped down his forehead, soaking into the collar of his custom-tailored shirt. "You sent me a very interesting text message last night, Connor," I said, my voice ringing out with crystal-clear precision. Every senior partner at the table turned their attention to him. Connor swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically toward the locked glass doors. "You told me that if I did not unlock Marcus's personal credit cards, you would use the Sterling Group legal team to strip me of my maternal rights. You threatened to take my 1-year-old son away from me. You called me an unemployed housewife and promised to leave me on the street with absolutely nothing." A murmur of absolute disgust rippled through the executives. Threatening a child was a line even corporate sharks recognized as abhorrent. Connor opened his mouth, raising his trembling hands in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "Nia, please," he stammered, his voice thin and reedy. "I was just stressed. I did not mean it. I was just trying to protect the company. The liquidity crisis was panicking me." I did not let him finish. I reached into the black dossier and pulled out a thick spiral-bound stack of forensic accounting reports marked with bright red confidential stamps. I tossed the heavy stack across the mahogany table. It slid perfectly, stopping right at the edge of his hands. "You were not panicking about the company, Connor," I stated, stepping closer to his side of the table. "You were panicking because my sudden capital withdrawal caused the tide to roll out entirely. And when the water receded, it completely exposed your naked, fraudulent bookkeeping." Connor recoiled from the stack of papers as if they were covered in poison. "Let us talk about your unparalleled financial genius." I continued pacing slowly behind his chair. "You thought you were so incredibly clever. You assumed the anonymous billionaire running Obsidian Trust would never notice minor fractional discrepancies in an account holding hundreds of millions of dollars. You created phantom vendors. You authorized fake consulting fees to shell companies. You meticulously siphoned funds from our primary development escrow over the course of 14 months. I stopped pacing and leaned down, lowering my voice, so the absolute danger in my tone resonated right next to his ear. $4 million, Connor. You embezzled $4 million of my money." Marcus, who had been staring at the table in a state of catatonic shock, suddenly snapped his head up. "What?" Marcus choked out, staring at his brother-in-law. $4 million. What are you talking about?" Connor did not look at Marcus. He could not look at anyone. He stared fixedly at the forensic audit report, his breathing coming in short, rapid gasps. "Your brilliant chief financial officer has a severe, crippling gambling addiction," I explained to Marcus, though my eyes remained locked on Connor. "He owes highly dangerous people in Las Vegas a massive amount of money. He has been bleeding your company dry to cover his debts, using my investment capital to mask the missing funds. He was shifting money from active construction loans to pay off casino markers." Marcus grabbed the edge of the table, looking like he might vomit. "You stole from the company," Marcus yelled. his own ruin momentarily eclipsed by his brother-in-law's betrayal. "Connor, you swore the books were perfectly balanced." I stood up straight, addressing the entire boardroom. The books were perfectly balanced on a house of cards. But my forensic audit team from Obsidian Trust does not miss a single misplaced cent. They tracked the offshore wire transfers. They traced the shell companies right back to Connor's personal accounts. We have undeniable documented proof of systemic corporate embezzlement, wire fraud, and severe fiduciary malpractice. Connor finally broke. The remaining shreds of his corporate dignity evaporated entirely. He fell out of his chair, dropping heavily to his knees right there on the boardroom floor. "Nia, I am begging you," Connor sobbed, clasping his hands together in a desperate, humiliating prayer. "I will pay it back. I swear to God I will pay back every single dime. Just give me time. Do not destroy my life. If you expose this, I will lose my license. I will lose everything. Jasmine will leave me. Think about your sister-in-law, Nia. Think about Jasmine. Do not do this to our family." Ooh. I looked down at the man kneeling on the polished floor. The absolute audacity of invoking the concept of family after he had threatened to take my child away from me less than 8 hours ago was staggering. "You forfeited the right to use the word family the second you sent that text message about my son," I said, my voice completely stripped of empathy. "And as for paying it back, you do not have a single asset to your name that is not heavily mortgaged." I stepped back, allowing Elias to take the floor. "Mr. Thorne," I commanded, "please inform the former chief financial officer of his current legal status." Elias stepped forward, looking down at Connor with an expression of pure clinical disgust. "We are not here to negotiate a repayment plan," Elias stated, his voice booming with authority. "The forensic audit report, along with the complete digital trail of your wire fraud and embezzlement, has already been finalized. As of 6 o'clock this morning, our legal team dispatched the entire dossier via secure courier to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. A secondary, highly detailed report has been filed directly with the Enforcement Division of the Securities and Exchange Commission." Connor let out a raw, guttural wail. He slumped forward, his forehead pressing against the cold marble floor. The reality of his situation had finally crushed him. "It is no longer an internal corporate matter," Elias continued ruthlessly. "You are officially facing a multi-agency federal investigation. Given the dollar amount and the clear evidence of interstate wire fraud, you are looking at a mandatory minimum sentence in a federal penitentiary. You are not going to lose your license, Connor. You are going to lose your freedom. I strongly suggest you use whatever funds you have left to hire a criminal defense attorney immediately." The boardroom was dead silent, save for the sound of Connor weeping openly on the floor. The senior partners looked completely horrified, realizing how close their own reputations had come to being destroyed by the actions of these two reckless men. They were looking at me not just as a savior, but as a force of nature that demanded absolute respect. I looked down at Connor one last time. There was no pity in my heart. He had built a life on deception, arrogance, and theft. He had tried to weaponize my motherhood against me to save his own skin. He had played a high-stakes game with a woman he severely underestimated, and he had lost absolutely everything. The financial execution of the executives was officially complete. The CEO was bankrupt. The CFO was headed for federal prison. But the collateral damage was far from over. The shockwaves of this boardroom massacre were about to hit the people waiting blissfully unaware outside these glass doors. The heavy, frosted glass doors of the boardroom were suddenly shoved open with a violent, desperate force. My security contractors immediately stepped forward, their hands resting near their holsters, but I raised a single hand to halt them. I knew exactly who was storming through that entrance. I wanted her in the room. Jasmine Sterling. Marcus's older sister and Connor's wife marched into the executive suite. She was wearing her signature pristine tennis whites and clutching a highly exclusive Hermes bag, completely oblivious to the financial massacre that had just taken place. She had clearly rushed straight from her morning country club appointment, the exact moment her platinum credit card started declining. Her face was flushed with entitled indignation, ready to scold her brother and her husband for the inconvenience. "Marcus," Jasmine yelled, her voice piercing the heavy silence of the room. What is going on? My cards are frozen. The country club manager just pulled me aside in front of the entire tennis committee to tell me my account is delinquent, Connor. Why are you not answering your phone? She stopped dead in her tracks. Her eyes finally adjusted to the scene inside the boardroom. She saw the grim faces of the senior partners. She saw Marcus slumped in his chair, looking like a hollowed-out corpse. And then, she looked down at the polished marble floor. Connor was still on his knees. His expensive suit wrinkled his face, buried in his hands as he wept uncontrollably. Jasmine dropped her designer bag. It hit the floor with a heavy thud. Connor. She gasped, taking a hesitant step forward. Connor, get up! What is happening? Why are you on the floor? Marcus, what is wrong with him? Marcus did not answer her. He could not even lift his head. I stepped smoothly around the edge of the mahogany table, positioning myself directly in Jasmine's line of sight. Welcome to the emergency board meeting, Jasmine, I said, my voice projecting crisp and clear across the room. We were just discussing your husband's unparalleled financial strategies. Jasmine's head snapped toward me. The confusion on her face rapidly morphed into a sneer of deep-seated resentment. She had always treated me with the same condescending superiority as her mother. Nia, what are you doing here? This is a closed corporate meeting. You have absolutely no business being in this building. Marcus, get your wife out of here before she embarrasses us. I am not here as his wife, I corrected her sharply, my tone leaving absolutely no room for disrespect. I am here as the sole proprietor of Obsidian Trust. I own 75% of this company. I am the reason you have that designer bag, the country club membership, and the private school tuition for your children. And as of this morning, the Bank of Nia is officially permanently closed. Jasmine stared at me, her brain completely short-circuiting. She looked at Marcus for a denial, a laugh, any sign that this was a bizarre prank. Marcus only closed his eyes, a silent, agonizing confirmation of his total defeat. Jasmine looked down at her husband again. Connor, tell me what she is talking about. Tell me this is a joke. Connor let out a pathetic, shuddering breath. He reached out with a trembling hand, trying to grasp the hem of Jasmine's tennis skirt. I am sorry, Jazz, he sobbed, his voice breaking. I am so sorry. I lost it. I lost all of it. You lost what? Jasmine shrieked, batting his hand away as if he were diseased. What did you lose? I will tell you exactly what he lost. I intervened, walking over to the stack of forensic audit reports and sliding a copy down the table toward her. Your husband is a degenerate gambler, Jasmine. He owes dangerous people in Las Vegas millions of dollars. To cover his massive debts, he has been systematically embezzling money from this company. He stole $4 million of my investment capital. Jasmine physically recoiled, staggering backward until her shoulders hit the glass wall. No. No, that is impossible. Connor is a financial genius. Marcus checks the books. Marcus would never let that happen. Marcus was too busy playing the billionaire playboy to actually look at a spreadsheet, I stated coldly, gesturing to the ruined CEO. He was too busy buying custom sports cars and entertaining his mistress in his private study to notice that his chief financial officer was bleeding his empire entirely dry. Jasmine's breath hitched. She looked at Chloe, who was still cowering silently in the corner of the room, and the sickening reality of the entire situation finally locked into place. The illusion of her perfect, wealthy, untouchable family shattered into a million irreparable pieces right in front of her eyes. The audit has already been sent to the FBI and the Securities and Exchange Commission. I continue delivering the final crushing blow. The federal authorities are likely preparing the indictment warrants as we speak. Your husband is going to federal prison, Jasmine. All of your assets, your house, your cars, your trust accounts will be seized by the government to pay restitution. You are completely broke. Jasmine let out a raw, visceral scream. It was not a cry of sadness. It was a scream of pure, agonizing loss of status. Her entire identity was tied to her wealth and her perceived superiority. Without it, she was absolutely nothing. She lunged forward, slapping Connor hard across the face. The sharp crack echoed through the boardroom. You ruined my life! Jasmine shrieked, hitting his shoulders wildly as he cowered on the floor. You promised me security. You promised me we were untouchable. You stole from my brother. You stole from our family. You are blaming the wrong person for stealing from your family, I said quietly, watching the chaotic display of thieves turning on each other. You should ask your mother where the real deception started. Right on cue, as if summoned by the mention of her name, the sleek smartphone sitting on the mahogany table began to vibrate. The caller ID flashed in bright, bold letters. Mama Brenda. The entire boardroom fell completely silent again. The senior partners watched with bated breath. Jasmine stopped hitting Connor, turning her tear-streaked face toward the phone. I picked up the device. I did not hold it to my ear. I tapped the green button and immediately pressed the speaker icon, placing the phone flat in the center of the table so every single person in the room could hear the matriarch of the Sterling family. Nia, Mama Brenda's voice crackled through the speaker. The tone was entirely unrecognizable. Gone was the shrill, demanding arrogance from last night. Gone was the condescending Southern belle routine. Her voice was shaking, fragile, and utterly soaked in desperation. She had clearly received a frantic text from Marcus or Jasmine. She knew the empire was gone. I am here, Brenda, I replied, my voice smooth and chillingly calm. You are on speakerphone in the executive boardroom. Marcus, Connor, Jasmine, and the senior partners are all listening. A sharp, terrified intake of breath echoed through the phone. Nia, please, please, sweetie, you have to stop this. I am begging you. I leaned over the table, resting my fingertips on the wood. Begging me. That is a very sudden change in posture. Just a few hours ago, you called me a stay-at-home. Nobody. You told me I was a freeloader playing dress-up in a world I did not belong in. You demanded that I get on my knees and apologize to your cheating son. I was wrong. Mama Brenda sobbed, her voice cracking with raw panic. I was so wrong, Nia. I was just upset. I did not mean any of those terrible things. You are a brilliant, beautiful woman. You are the best thing that ever happened to Marcus. We are family, Nia. Please do not destroy our family. Do not take everything away from us. We will do whatever you want. We will make it right. I looked at Marcus, who was staring at the phone, tears finally spilling over his eyelashes. I looked at Jasmine, who was weeping into her hands. I looked at Connor on the floor. You cannot make it right, Brenda, I said, my voice dropping to a register of absolute unforgiving authority. Because you cannot unsay the things you said when you thought I was powerless. You showed me exactly who you are. You worshipped money and you used it as a weapon to abuse me, belittle me, and excuse your son's disgusting behavior. You thought you held all the cards. You thought you could treat me like garbage because you assumed I needed your wealth to survive. Nia, please have mercy. I am an old woman. Do not leave my children destitute. I do not have a single ounce of mercy left for you, I stated coldly. Your son is bankrupt. Your son-in-law is a federal criminal. Your daughter is about to lose her country club membership and her mansion. The Sterling family name is officially worthless. I stood up straight, ready to deliver the final execution. You told me I hit the jackpot when Marcus settled for me. I reminded her, the edge of a dark smile touching my lips. But the truth is, I am the jackpot. And the Sterling family just went entirely bankrupt. Enjoy your Sunday dinners, Brenda. I reached down and pressed the red button. The call disconnected with a sharp final beep. The absolute silence that followed was the sound of a total, irreversible victory. I did not need to say another word. I turned my back on the weeping, ruined family, signaled to Elias and my security detail, and walked out of the boardroom without ever looking back. I had barely crossed the threshold of the boardroom, the heavy glass doors beginning to swing shut behind me, when a frantic, pathetic scrambling sound echoed from the polished marble floor. Someone was desperately pushing past the ruined executives. Nia, wait. Please, you have to listen to me. I stopped in the center of the expansive corporate corridor. I did not turn around immediately. I let the sound of her frantic breathing hit my back. I signaled to my security detail to hold their positions for just a moment. I slowly pivoted on my heel to face the woman who had spent the last 10 years calling me her sister. Chloe practically fell through the boardroom doors. Her pristine white blazer was heavily wrinkled. Her hair, which she had spent hours perfecting for her grand debut as a corporate executive, was clinging to her tear-soaked cheeks. The confident, smug mistress who had proudly posed in my master bathroom just 12 hours ago was completely gone. In her place stood a terrified, hyperventilating opportunist who had finally done the math. The reality of the situation had finally pierced through her thick layer of delusion. Chloe was not a financial expert, but she understood basic addition and subtraction. She had just watched her supposed billionaire king get stripped of his company, his equity, and his entire identity. She had heard the undeniable truth that Marcus currently held over $10 million in unsecured personal debt. He had no mansion, he had no luxury cars, he had no black card. Chloe realized with horrifying clarity that the man she had destroyed her oldest friendship for was entirely broke. She had sacrificed her integrity, her reputation, and her only genuine support system to secure a front-row seat on a sinking ship. She was now tethered to a man who would be chased by creditors for the rest of his natural life. The extravagant high society lifestyle she had so desperately craved was a mirage, and she had just thrown away her relationship with the woman who actually owned the oasis. She took a stumbling step toward me, reaching out with a trembling hand. "Nia, you have to believe me," Chloe sobbed, her voice cracking with raw panic. "He manipulated me. Marcus told me you two were basically divorced. He told me he was miserable and that you were dragging him down. I was stupid. I was so weak, and he took advantage of my vulnerability." I looked down at her outstretched hand, then brought my eyes up to meet hers. My expression was carved from solid ice. "Do you honestly expect me to believe that you are a victim in this scenario?" I asked, my voice deadly calm. "You are 29 years old, Chloe. You have a college degree. You have agency. You knew exactly whose husband you were kissing. You knew exactly whose bed you were sleeping in. You were not manipulated. You were highly motivated." Tears streamed down her face, ruining her expensive foundation. "I was jealous," she blurted out, resorting to a pathetic display of honesty in a desperate bid for sympathy. "I was so jealous of you, Nia. You always had everything. You had the perfect husband, the massive house, the perfect life. I just wanted a piece of it. I wanted to feel what it was like to be on top for once." "I am so sorry. Please do not do this. I will leave him. I will never speak to Marcus again. Just please forgive me." Her willingness to instantly abandon Marcus the very second she realized he was broke was the most revealing part of her entire confession. She did not love him. She never loved him. She only loved the money she thought he possessed. I took a slow, deliberate step toward her. She flinched, shrinking back against the frosted glass of the boardroom door. "You wanted a piece of my life?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly measured. "I gave you pieces of my life for a decade, Chloe. When your financial aid fell through at Spelman, I paid your tuition gap. When you could not afford rent in Atlanta, I paid your lease for 6 months. I clothed you, I fed you, and I treated you like blood. But that was never enough for you, was it? You did not just want my help, you wanted my crown." I shook my head slowly, looking at her with a profound, unyielding disgust. "You posted a picture calling me a maid," I reminded her. "You tried to humiliate me in front of the entire world. You thought you could step into my shoes because you fundamentally underestimated who I am. You looked at a quiet, supportive wife and assumed weakness. You assumed Marcus was the source of my power because your entire worldview is based on attaching yourself to a man. You could never fathom that a black woman could quietly build a multi-million-dollar empire without seeking applause." "Nia, please, I have nothing." Chloe wept, dropping to her knees on the marble floor. "I quit my job yesterday when Marcus told me I was going to be an executive here. My apartment lease is up. I have absolutely nowhere to go. I am begging you." "You are begging the wrong person," I stated coldly. "You tied your wagon to Marcus Sterling. I suggest you go back inside that boardroom and ask your new boyfriend how he plans to pay your rent with a frozen bank account and $10 million in debt." I turned away from her, adjusting my tailored blazer. I looked at the lead security contractor standing just a few feet away. Escort her out of the building, I ordered, my voice ringing with absolute final authority. And ensure she uses the freight elevator. Do not let trash dirty my office carpet. The security guards moved with immediate tactical precision. Two large men stepped forward, grabbing Chloe firmly by the arms and hauling her to her feet. She began to thrash and scream, her composure completely shattering as the physical reality of her eviction set in. Nia, Chloe shrieked, her voice echoing wildly down the polished corridor. Nia, you cannot do this, Marcus. Marcus, help me. She screamed his name repeatedly as the guards dragged her backward toward the service exit. I stood perfectly still, watching the boardroom doors. I waited to see if Marcus would emerge to defend the woman he had risked his marriage for. I waited to see if the self-proclaimed king would step out and save his mistress from being forcibly removed from the premises. The boardroom doors remained completely shut. Marcus did not come out. He was too busy suffocating under the weight of his own financial ruin to care about the woman screaming his name in the hallway. He had abandoned her just as quickly as she had offered to abandon him. They truly deserved each other. The heavy metal doors of the freight elevator slammed shut, cutting off Chloe's frantic screams entirely. The profound, beautiful silence returned to the corporate corridor. I took a deep, cleansing breath. The toxicity had been fully excised from my environment. The parasites had been removed. It was time to close this chapter completely and deliver the final permanent severance to the man who started it all. I turned on my heel and walked back toward the frosted glass doors of the boardroom. The security guards opened them instantly, stepping aside to let me pass. The room had cleared out significantly. The senior partners had swiftly evacuated the toxic environment to consult with Elias and the transition team regarding the impending hostile takeover. Connor had been escorted away, likely to wait for the federal authorities in a cold holding room. The only person left in the massive, hollowed-out executive suite was Marcus. He was sitting on the floor now. He was not in his plush leather CEO chair, but on the cold marble, his back resting against the base of the heavy mahogany table. His bespoke suit jacket was crumpled on the ground beside him. His tie was loosened, his collar unbuttoned, and his pristine image completely shattered. He looked up when he heard the sharp, rhythmic clicking of my heels approaching. Nia, he croaked. He scrambled to his hands and knees, crawling toward me like a beaten dog. The man who had demanded I pack my bags just 24 hours ago was now quite literally at my feet. Please, Marcus begged, looking up at me with bloodshot eyes, tears streaming freely down his face. Please, Nia, I lost my mind. The pressure of the business, the stress of providing the lifestyle I thought you demanded, it broke me. Chloe meant absolutely nothing. She was just a distraction from the financial anxiety. I love you. You are the mother of my child. We can fix this. I will go to counseling. I will do whatever you want. I will sign whatever contracts you need. Just please do not leave me with nothing. I looked down at him. There was a time when seeing him cry would have broken my heart. I would have dropped to my knees beside him, wrapping my arms around his shoulders, promising that we would face the storm together as a team. But the woman who would have done that died the exact moment he grabbed my wrist in his study and told me I was nothing but a freeloader. You did not do any of this for me, Marcus. I stated, my voice echoing coldly in the empty room. You did it for your own fragile ego. You needed to feel like a god among men, and when the reality of your incompetence became too heavy to bear, you found a woman who would blindly worship your artificial wealth. You are not sorry for betraying your family. You are only sorry that the bank vault slammed shut on your fingers and caught you in the act. I reached out my hand without looking away from his pathetic, tear-stained face. Elias, standing just inside the doorway, stepped forward and placed a thick, pristine white envelope into my palm. I weighed it in my hand for a brief second. I looked back down at Marcus. He was still on his knees, his hands clasped together in a desperate, trembling prayer. I told you yesterday that I was stepping out of your house, I said smoothly, my tone perfectly even. Now I am stepping out of your life entirely. I opened the envelope and pulled out the thick stack of legal documents. I did not hand them to him. I did not place them politely on the table. With a sharp, deliberate flick of my wrist, I threw the entire stack of papers directly into his face. The heavy premium paper struck his cheek and chest before bursting apart, the individual pages fluttering down around him like a violent, suffocating snowfall. "Those are the divorce filings," I announced as the papers settled onto the marble floor around his knees. "My legal team has already submitted them to the Fulton County Superior Court. Since I independently own every single major asset through my proxy corporations, and since you currently possess $10 million in unsecured personal debt, the division of property will be incredibly straightforward. You keep your debt. I keep my empire." Marcus stared blankly at the divorce papers scattered around his hands, reading the bold, unforgiving legal text bearing his name. "And regarding our son," I continued, my voice dropping to a register of absolute terrifying finality, "I have filed for sole physical and legal custody. Given your impending bankruptcy, your documented infidelity, and the recorded audio of your mother threatening my safety and financial stability, no judge in this state will grant you anything more than highly supervised, heavily restricted visitation. You will never have the opportunity to teach my son how to be a coward." "Nia, no," Marcus wailed, grabbing a handful of the divorce papers and crushing them against his chest as if he could absorb the legal reality. "You cannot take Leo from me. You cannot take my son." "I am not taking him from you," I corrected sharply. "You abandoned him the second you brought your mistress into his home. You traded your family for a fleeting ego boost. Now you get to live with the exact life you built." I turned my back on him. I did not wait for another desperate plea. I did not listen to his pathetic, echoing sobs bouncing off the glass walls. I walked out of the boardroom flanked by my legal team and security detail, leaving Marcus Sterling kneeling in the ruins of his own making, surrounded by the legal documentation of his total annihilation. The transition from the sterile, cold corporate headquarters to my private sanctuary was profound. Hours later, the chaotic, violent energy of the day had completely washed away. The sun was beginning to set over Atlanta. The sky was painted in breathtaking shades of deep violet, burnt orange, and brilliant gold. I stood in the massive living room of my hidden penthouse. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered an unobstructed panoramic view of the entire city skyline. In the far distance, I could just barely make out the skyline of Buckhead, the neighborhood where my former life was currently being boxed up by moving crews I had hired that morning. I was no longer wearing the severe, structured charcoal blazer. I had changed into a soft, luxurious cashmere robe. I felt light. I felt incredibly clean. The toxic weight that had been pressing down on my chest for years was entirely gone, replaced by a deep, sustaining peace. I held Leo securely against my hip. He had just woken up from a late afternoon nap, his eyes wide and curious as he looked out at the glowing city lights beginning to flicker on across the horizon. He reached a tiny, chubby hand toward the glass, pointing at the glowing skyscrapers below us. I kissed his soft, warm cheek. He giggled, wrapping his little arms around my neck. He was safe. He was protected by a fortress of wealth and legal armor that absolutely no one could penetrate. He would grow up knowing a mother who demanded respect, a mother who built empires in silence and dismantled threats with devastating, unapologetic precision. I looked out over the sprawling city, feeling the immense humming power of the life I had meticulously designed. Marcus, Chloe, Connor, and Mama Brenda had all looked at me and seen a weak, dependent woman. They thought my quiet nature was a sign of submission. They thought my grace was a symptom of powerlessness. They played a dangerous game of financial and emotional roulette, betting everything on the arrogant assumption that I would simply fold under pressure. I turned slightly, looking directly into the invisible camera, meeting the gaze of anyone who had ever been underestimated, overlooked, or betrayed by the people they trusted most. A slow, sharp, utterly triumphant smile spread across my face. My voice was calm, resonant, and dripping with absolute power. They thought they could take everything from me, but they forgot one thing. I am the one who created everything.